All right. Hope that got everyone amped up. So for those who just dialed in, thank you so much for joining our Workbench Masterclass today. My name is Jessica Lynn. I'm a co-founder and partner at Workbench. We are a VC firm based here in New York City. We lead seed rounds in enterprise software and SaaS startups here in New York and throughout the country, including such great companies like Cockroach Labs, Spring Health, Socure, Fire Hydrant Arthur, and many, many more. And most of our team, we come from larger enterprises, and so we're obsessed with all things go-to-market on the 0 to 1 journey. And it's the #1 thing we work on with our founders day in and day out. We have been investing for the past 10 years, and we've also grown a really awesome community of enterprise and SaaS folks here in New York. And we host this regular Enterprise Masterclass series where we get founders, operators, and execs to share their most tactical playbook. So we are super lucky today to have Kiran Narsu with us to talk. I signed a customer, now what? How to structure a post-sales process. So Kiran is our longtime Workbench sales advisor, revenue leader here in New York. He's actually hosted some of our top sales masterclasses. But the reason why we are so passionate about today's topic is that if you look at everything that is published online, there are a ton of amazing sales playbooks, blog posts, resources out there online about sales. But what we've found is that there is far less resources around post-sales. So what actually happens after you sign a contract with a customer and all the many, many intentional things that you and your team have to do to implement, to onboard, and to make your customer successful. So this is actually the #1 thing we see here at Workbench that many companies really fail to do is they get really excited a contract is signed, they hit the gong, and then they go back to closing new deals. Where actually we would say your post-sales is arguably just as important as your sales. We cannot stress this enough. It's not enough to just have a friendly customer success person dealing with support. That is not enough, and you will see this today. And that's why we are so pumped to have Kiran take us through his playbook, and especially a ton of his templates that you can put into action and take back to your post-sales teams tomorrow. So feel free to add your questions into our chat and ask them throughout. We'll take them throughout Kiran's session and make this really as interactive of a conversation as possible. And with that, I will hand it over to Kiran.
Hello, Jessica, and hello, everybody on the call. Thank you so much for joining today's session. I hope that this is a valuable session for you all, and it's near and dear to my heart because I've had the fortune of, as part of running sales organizations, I've also had to stand up the CS function a few times and have made my share of mistakes in doing it. So I hope that this is helpful in terms of giving you some practical techniques and processes that you can apply to really improve that post-sales process. So let's dive right in. So first of all, who is this for? It's really for earlier stage founders and sellers. In the earlier stage, I mean seed and AA stages, ideally where you've got customers that are gaining some value from your product, ideally commensurate with sort of the founding vision of the problem that you're trying to solve. It's especially helpful for those of you who might be selling a product that maybe is a little bit more complex. And what I mean by that is maybe that there's some setup or integration, configuration, et cetera, that needs to happen before customers can start to derive value and benefits from your product. And that likely you're selling to larger organizations, maybe to enterprises, maybe to larger mid-market orgs, or I would say characteristics of that might be they have a more complex and diverse footprint of software and tools, and also people and resources that may make use of the products that you're selling. So what we're really going to focus on covering today is ways to, what I like to call 5 tactics that can help you sort of nail this post-sales process, starting with what I like to call defining your customer life cycle. And we'll talk about it in a lot more detail from your point of view, not from the customers, but from your point of view, capturing the nuances that are involved in the go live process. And we'll talk about what I even mean by go live, because I think there are a lot of people that maybe define it slightly differently. Looking for mechanisms to relentlessly compress the cycle between the time that they start and the time that they start to get value out of it in a go live capacity. And then, of course, building advocacy, and I'll talk a little bit about how to structure that, as well as the organizational and staffing and accountability aspects of the function. So the core principle behind, I think, this session that I would love for folks to take away is that many of you may be selling what I'll call a new or a different way of doing something. Maybe it's a different way of managing permissions. Maybe it's a different way of reducing cloud costs or managing digital content or whatever it might be that's native to your specific app. So while your product benefits are obvious to you, it shouldn't be the case that customers will just know how to get value and get going with your particular product, especially if they're switching over from either a manual process or they're switching over from one or more other tools that are in place that you're potentially replacing. So if you go in knowing that that's not the case, that they're just not going to know it unless they get help from you, it really changes the way you potentially can approach how you solve this. And we'll talk a lot about that in more detail. So as a good friend of mine likes to say, a SaaS company is a leaky bucket full of ARR, and our job is to make sure that there are no leaks or as few leaks as possible, because every time water leaks out in the form of ARR, you've got to replace it before you can start to measure your net new growth on top of that. So it is not a fun situation to be in. So let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges that I see, and I think the common thread on these. I'll just point out a couple. Our key champion left the org months ago, and we just found out. I see that all the time, right? We may not have deep relationships above the day-to-day users. We may not even have a sense of whether the customer is using our product in sort of a live setting, meaning that they're using it as their primary function for what we sold it for. Or we've got a CS team, but they're so busy dealing with support issues that they haven't had time to invest in the strategic usage of the product by the customer. And maybe we just didn't flip the switch so that they didn't know how to move from the old way to the new way. So these are really common things that I see a lot. One of the biggest things that really impacts this is when we sell to an organization of any size, really, change is a constant. People will come and go from the organization as you work with them. And maybe your champion moves, maybe they get promoted or what have you, and all of a sudden that lack of sort of making sure that we're keeping our strong base, if it starts to erode, we're going to start to run into potential issues where sort of churn can start to pop up. So let's really dispense with one myth right off the top. Many of you use software agreements that might be a one-year subscription. Many of you are lucky enough to do 2 or 3 year agreements. However the agreement is constructed, that as Jess pointed out right at the beginning, if you sign a typical enterprise software agreement that's 1 year in term, and you sign it on Jan 1st and you expect to renew it on January 31st, it's really not this monolithic chevron. It's really a bunch of little things that, depending upon the product you have, introduce some variety and some variation that you have to really think about. First, for example, if your product needs some setup and implementation or integration with backend systems, there may be a few months of that work that you're doing, the customer's doing, or you're both doing, or maybe there's a partner involved that's helping. In some cases, once you've done that implementation, they're not just going to always flip the switch. They might want to run in parallel with their existing system. They might want to validate that yours is working as well before they switch off the stuff they've been using for a long time. We've also got training to take into account that might happen later or all through that cycle. We also have this sort of what I'll call a cutover situation. So all while the clock hasn't really started ticking on the value measurement because they haven't started using it in a production kind of capacity or live capacity, right? But that calendar date is an immovable object. It's not moving out if you take longer to implement. It's still there, which means the time you have is starting to get compressed, during which point you can measure and prove out the value. And in this market with people looking to reduce software spend, reduce the number of vendors they do business with, and simplify their lives from that perspective, the onus is on us to really make sure that we reach a point of proof as early as we can in the cycle. So what do we do about this? So one of the things I strongly recommend is that we think about our engagement with our customer in a life cycle kind of way. And I want to go through that. Then we can start to lay down some rails so that we can stick to things and we can make sure that we're keeping customers on those rails with us. So ultimately, our goal is to shorten what I and many others call time to value. There's some great blog posts on this topic, and modeled in sort of an ideal progression through the stages, and are clear about who does what, if there especially is some of these types of situations like you have to implement, you have to integrate, you have to configure, et cetera, et cetera. So let's take a look at what that is. This is pretty simplistic, but I find that having it in place with a lot of detail behind each one is really important. So for example, the sales cycle is the sales cycle. And for some companies on this call, maybe it's a 1 to 3 week sales cycle. Some companies on this call, maybe it's a 6 to 9 month sales cycle. Either way, that begins with our first engagement with the prospect and it ends with a signed contract. The deploy stage begins with a signed contract and ends when that customer has given us a sign off or they're live and we've gotten some sort of commonly agreed upon outcome that is driving us to the next stage, right? The prove stage begins when they're live and ends when they get the business value we sold them on. Now, that might also include a renewal, but it might predate that. Ideally, it's well before the renewal comes up, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we've also set up some level of cadence and governance with the client so that we can keep an eye on the project and keep it healthy, right? Because I sort of implore us to think about it in that regard. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but this is also a place where we can really advocate and surface issues early so that we can address them in as expeditious a manner as possible. The aim that we should have is to relentlessly remove time and effort from that stage. Effort on the customer side, effort on our side, so that we can really compress that chevron, if you will, as much as possible. So let's take a deeper look at stage 2. And again, I'm going to give you an example that I've crafted. It's based on things I've used in the past, but yours is likely to be very different. But if we go through this, I think you'll be able to take it and sort of run with it on your basis. But maybe your system has 3 stages for your set deployment of your product. Maybe there's a kickoff phase where you gather information from the customer in terms of users, configurations, roles, et cetera. Maybe if there's integrations, what are some of those tools? Ideally, we've captured that in the sales cycle. And that we then take that information, do the work of setup and configuration, and then, of course, activation and training, right? So, one of the things that I like to do is to not just describe the steps, but also say, at what point do we reach the live? And I'm going to give you some examples of what I mean by live, but live means they're using it, right? And they're using it in the capacity in which we intended it. So then we start to zero in on, if we're the vendor, here are the things we've got to do during each stage of the deployment cycle. And these are the things that the customer has to do in each step of the cycle. And here's how long, in terms of elapsed time, it will take to get through each of these. Again, this is illustrative. It could be days, weeks, months. Every product is of course different, as well as lay down a level of project cadence between us and the customer. So, in the startup phase, we want to make sure we welcome the main points of contact. We schedule the kickoff call. We conduct it to walk through the whole process with them, make it clear what they're on the hook for, make it clear what we're on the hook for, zero in on some things that might slow us down so we can identify some mitigation strategies. Here's what we need you to do, Mr. and Ms. Customer, in terms of what we need to do to set up. What are the dependencies from us? Okay, well, we can't really start configs of the users and administration account within the product until we have a set of information from you, Mr. and Ms. Customer. So here's a template for you to provide that to us, or a web URL or what have you, right? Credentials, et cetera. And this is going to obviously be very different for each of the products, but I think the key point is This should be an external customer-facing asset that the sellers are equipped to use during the sales cycle itself. Because the earlier you can use this sort of clarity of what the journey is going to look like after you sign, the more confidence we help build up in us with the customer or with the prospect, as well as we surface pretty early on that, oh, we need an API integration. Oh, who's typically going to do that? Oh, typically we work with this type of a data analyst in the organization. Who would that be? And we can start to have these conversations. Now it feels like we're putting the deal more in the glide path because we're talking about the post-signing process during the sales process. And it's very liberating in a lot of ways as well. So I think it's very important that we use this because it's a confidence builder on the customer side, and it's a risk mitigator as well. So I won't walk through these in great detail, but I think there's a lot of factors that are unique to your products that will then, that will be relevant in deciding what those chevrons should be, what are the steps within each of them, what are the dependencies, etc. Some products that I've encountered in my life are live in an afternoon when somebody buys it. That doesn't mean they're live in the context of the customer, but they're ready for the customer to get value out. Some need integration, some need like the stuff we talked about. It's important to quantify what that work is. Can we describe it? Is it engineering driven? Who does the work? Is it stuff that we've got to do on our side? Is it stuff that the customer has to do on their side, or both? Is this work highly customer specific, or can we automate and sort of programmatize some of these steps as well? Because I think the more that we can do that, the better. And again, I also emphasize that there's a lot of organizations or software companies that sell a product that needs some fairly sophisticated work to be done before the customer can go live with it. If that's the case, embrace the professional services and embrace the statement of work, because it provides a level of rigor and clarity around the work and defining what that work looks like and who has to do it, as well as describing what the sort of migration to go live process looks like. So I think it's important to emphasize that we want the notion of go live to be something tangible. Like, you're using this system today, go live means you can now use ours as the primary means to do X. I'll give you some examples in a minute. And that we target a date for that, and we hold both us and the client accountable for achieving that date, but surfacing risks to that. Like, hey, we didn't get the integration parameters set up properly. We really need some time with your engineering team to do that. Otherwise, we're going to miss our go live. Like, being able to have those types of conversations well before it, so that we continue to track towards that. So the other piece that I think is really important is to lay down some rails with respect to what you'll do and what the customer will do once they're live. We want to continuously educate them. We want to make sure they're up to date on new functionality that we might have released in the interim after we've gone live with them. We as an organization want to track the active use of the product, and I want to spend quite a bit of time talking about that piece as well as using Slack or Teams or what have you to engage and surface issues on a regular basis. The analytics and reporting is a key piece, because I think the onus is on the software company to tell the customer how it's going instead of assuming they'll figure it out. It goes back to the core principle I mentioned at the beginning of the call, and that is, here's how you measure usage and success with the product, specifically to our product, and let's agree on what those are, because ideally, if you do, they'll start to use those. And I've seen this play out in real life, where we produce the metrics, and those are used internally by the customer to surface and showcase the value and success of the initiative with other stakeholders. And it helps to win converts and hearts and minds, and set the ground for a potential expansion within the organization as well. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about this concept because it's near and dear to my heart. A lot of times our product can tell us what's going on, and if we're not listening to our own product, then we are potentially missing opportunities to grow the account, but also risk indicators that might indicate potential for things like churn. So time to value really starts from the point where they go live. And again, everyone probably has a slightly definition. This is mine, but where they go live to the point where they're starting to get sufficient value out of the product where they really can't sort of live without it. So I call these stages usage, adoption, and dependency. I don't advocate using the word dependency externally. It's an internal use. They might have the wrong connotation. But let me explain what I mean by these. So usage might mean, and by the way, our job is to compress this, hence the little vice there. But so I'll give you an example with a fictitious expense management software company I just made up. Usage might be our product metrics are telling us that users are logged in. Maybe we sold 10 users to this customer for a sales and marketing team and a couple of finance users. And maybe the pain point was it takes too long to file expense reports with our Excel process. We need to reduce that time because whatever, right? And users are logging in. They've connected their email and calendars. Maybe they've downloaded the mobile app as another signal of usage. Adoption, maybe a signal might be that we've seen users submit their first expense reports, or finance created a first custom expense policy for sales or for field or for marketing or what have you. And dependency might be they've actually connected it to their ERP systems on the back end so they can automate everything all the way out to expense reimbursement. And maybe they've even set up some custom approval workflows so leaders can sort of manually or automate their approvals using the mobile app or using email or what have you. Again, I just made this up just to give you an example, but I would advocate the creation of metrics that capture this and how it changes against the target state that you achieve with your customer. So if we sold them 10 users, did we get by month 3 after go live, did we get all 10 of them good? That's great, right? Are they actively using the system by logging in? Of course, expense management, they don't use it every day, but they use it, a few times a month maybe, or what have you. What are some signals in the product that indicate that they've reached that adoption stage? And using metrics like this with the customer allows you to surface things like, you guys are supposed to create a bunch of custom expense policies so that people can do can use it in a different capacity for different types of expenses. Where are you on that? How can we help? You need a training session, et cetera, so that we can start to surface these issues before they become issues, capital I, and address them so that we can start to turn some of these no's that I show here on this Google Sheet into yeses. Now, this is a Google Sheet with some spark lines. It didn't take me very long to create. My guidance is not to use Google Sheets, but to have these signals emanate from your product. It's okay, maybe you start with the Google Sheet, but as long as you're both looking at the same set of data and you're tracking it on a regular basis, then you can do it in Excel and it'll probably just be fine. So I can't emphasize enough the use of the metrics that underscore realities that you can see and surface in your product and that you assign to specific level of maturity in their use of your product. Only you know that, and probably you need a diverse audience of people to define what those look like. So, some tactics: start this process during the sales cycle. In my days as seller, if we could talk about the end state in terms of, hey, we were able to shorten the time to do X, or we were able to reduce this by XY% as measured this way. In the sales cycle, it wins over a lot of hearts and minds. And then when we prove it out in the deployment and post live consistently with that language, there's a level of sort of continuity to how we talk about the product in the way of solving problems. Again, capturing the technical information, et cetera, as early on as possible as you can. Educating the buyer on how they'll use it. This is a core part of all of that. I like it when the sales team and the CS team and engineering / product work together to look at what can we do to shorten the time to go live by taking stuff out, not just time and steps, but also effort. Because even if you have only a couple steps, if the effort on the client side or on our side is very high, then you're not really improving it unless you look for ways to eliminate that. And then using dashboards. Again, reach out to me. I have all these templates, and we can certainly share with those of you who are interested after the call. And don't underestimate the complexity and the ability to disrupt CS that product support can create. In other words, make sure that you think about and set up a product support function that can be transitioned from CS so that when they're live, the responsible party for handling level 1, level 2 issues, et cetera, goes to a support function, and the CS resource is an escalation mechanism, not the primary owner, because ultimately I've seen it happen where they end up spending all their time on product support, chasing engineering and product, et cetera, and they're not advocating for broader use of the product, and that can really impact things. So let's talk a little bit about advocacy, because I think this is an area where companies can really put some distance between themselves and their competition or their other vendors in the space by relentlessly focusing on this. So when I talk about advocacy, I talk about customers who are willing to and proactively shout from the rooftops about how great your product is and maybe their vendor experience with you. Their advocacy has a way of amplifying your success in a way that you as a vendor can't do on your own. So what are the 4 components that I think are important to track? Number 1, relationship strength and depth. And these are not in any specific order, but we'll talk more about how we achieve each of these. So if we've got strong relationships, both with the key users, as well as maybe the operational team that runs it day to day, as well as maybe the next level up, we've got a level of sort of foundational base of support that will be more durable. And the ebbs and flows of, hey, cut our spend, reduce vendor dependencies, and blah, blah, blah. They'll defend us. They'll say, no, our product's working really well with them. We don't want to upset that. But when we lose sight of, and if we allow the relationship power map to move into stasis mode after we've sold the deal, and nobody's carrying and feeding that relationship map, we might miss signals like the champion leaving, et cetera. And I'll give you some examples in a moment. So that's a really important one. Obviously, business value achievement. We already talked about the metrics and how you can map them to those results. Whoops, sorry, did something here. Sorry about that. Did I stop sharing? I think I did.
Yeah, I think you just need to
Sorry.
reshare again.
Yeah. Sorry about that, folks. So let's talk a little bit about that usage and dependency. Again, those last 2 pieces we just talked about in the advocacy, the metrics from the product and the usage of the product combined together, tied to the outcomes that we sold against. If we can show them that they're using it day to day, if they can tell us, they're more likely to keep the software, and they're more likely to stick with their switch from their old way. And obviously, every software product has bugs. Every software product, fails, right? But it's what we do and how we respond when that happens, and how quickly we take care of things, how we communicate during that process, how proactive we are. If we do that really well, then they'll be fine with it, right? And all these things taken together means that we will get the external referenceability that we really need. And if you're an earlier stage company, you really need this, because your ability to reach the audience of people you want to sell to is limited because of your size and presence, and their amplification is invaluable. So what can we do? What can we do tactically to start bringing some of these things together? I want to talk a little bit about the handover, and I want to talk a little bit about sort of tracking internally, and then we can sort of open it up for questions. But with respect to the handover, I've seen in some cases where the handover is the AE setting up a meeting with a CS person because they just signed the contract. That's too late. Way too late. I strongly advise, if you have CS in the organization, technical account managers, whatever you call them, bring them into the deal when it's in the development stage where you're actively building the value of your solution, maybe doing ROI models or deeper demos with broader stakeholders, and you have a line of sight that they're going to sign in the next couple months, and that ideally when the customer wants to go live. You want to bring the CS people in, not just to inform them, but also so that they can speak from the first person point of view about what the journey looks like once you sign Mr. or Ms. Customer. Positioning them as sort of senior thought leaders in the space also helps insulate them from becoming whack-a-mole support people, which we don't want to have. Obviously, if you have a professional services aspect to the deployment of your product, they can also talk about the specifics of that, what they might need from the prospect, et cetera. And again, I have some I have some templates and examples of this, but I think there's probably a lot of brilliant CS people on this call who probably have way better templates than I. So I humbly submit mine, but feel free to take it and customize it to your heart's content. Another thing that I think is really important is setting up weekly cadence with CS and the sellers, and ideally engineering or product or both, so that you can track how you're doing with each customer consistently with your advocacy pillars. And like, here's an example, like, and I just made this up. So, and the week ending 11/22, if we found out that our champion resigned, which is a big blow to us because she was the one who sponsored us into the org. But then the next week, on the 11/29, she connected us with a replacement, and it's her boss. And we didn't actually know who her boss was. We hadn't sold to that person, but we were able to schedule a meeting with her. Oh, good news. We met with her. She loves us. She's getting a new SVP that's starting. And she also told us that EMEA wants to talk to us about our product. Woohoo. So we went from pink to orange to green. Again, this is not always going to play out in week by week increments, but just an example. Similarly, we surfaced that the user base is still too low. The people who are using us are getting great results consistent with what we sold them, but our user base is still too low based upon what they license. And we didn't really know why until we got into a conversation with Rose. And it turns out that some of the bugs that were surfaced weeks and weeks ago by them that we still haven't fixed are the reason why they didn't want to roll it out to the senior execs. And okay, so now that we've surfaced that, we got the engineering, we asked them for help. Thank you, engineering. You closed this bug out. They've now confirmed they're going to roll it out. Again, I'm just giving you some examples of how you can use this in a real meeting. So in a real CS stand-up meeting, it's let's go account by account. Where are we in terms of the stages of our deployment? What are the key next actions? What are the blockers and risks that we're running into? What are we doing to mitigate against those blockers and risks? And where do we need help? We, the CS team, need help, and from whom? So, and then having everybody on the same page is what outcome we're looking towards in terms of what we want to make or achieve is a real critical piece of achieving that and kind of keeping them on the rails, but getting them to a good state sooner rather than later. So sort of as we put all this together, there's a lot of other things. I've got a lot of other templates I'm happy to share with you. But a couple of key points, I really think it's important. Bring the CS people on. Some of the folks that had submitted questions, one of them was, when to hire. I think it's important to know the life cycle, having taken the steps to define it, and ideally taken a couple of customers through it, at least through the go live and maybe post live advocacy, because then you basically can then give the CS person a template for success. This is what you're hired to achieve. In some cases, you may need to hire somebody to help define all that, and that's fine too. But generally speaking, if you've built this stuff out, the CS team can start to execute on it and sort of scale it. Use language that's customer centric. I know a lot of us I'm guilty of it as well. I say the phrase onboarding, but that's a vendor out kind of term. Customers don't come to you and say, hey, please onboard me. They just don't talk like that, right? So we have to think about describing the stages that in a customer relevant way. Be really rigorous about the repository of the post-live docs and assets that you build, because they can be accelerators for you. They can also help you equip partners and other third parties to be really effective at doing the work that you normally would do yourself. Customer-facing templates for all of these things can be so helpful because it brings it to life for the customer in a way that sort of just talking about it or showing a product demo doesn't, right? Create your own advocacy scorecard. You can use the pillars I recommend. You can use your own. But if you have a consistent lens by which you look at and define success, you're going to get there in a lot more sort of intentional and deliberate way. Again, we talked about the CS checkpoint. There's some really cool product analytics tools on the market. I don't have a personal preference, but I've seen Postdoc, I've seen Mixpanel, seen a number of these other ones. You might also have built in a lot of the metrics in your product's reporting capability. I advocate you to use them because if the product is telling the story, it's almost unambiguous and it's unimpeachable because it's coming right from the source, right? when you're building those metrics that define advocacy and dependency, get diverse opinions, because product teams, especially if you're selling in an industry domain like say healthcare or finance, and you've got domain folks on the call with you or in the organization with you, seek their opinion about signals in the product and what it means. I love testimonial videos. There's some great tools out there like vocal video. I think it's important you write the scripts yourself and then ask them to sort of, speak extemporaneously, but around those broad points, because you really want them to emphasize it in the way that will help you to sell to new customers. But if you've done all this other work, they're just naturally going to use the language anyway, because you've trained them on the metrics you want them to care about. And then lastly, staffing and structuring both CS and the support function. I have detailed files in terms of the coverage model. I've built some coverage models as part of revenue ramp docs that I can potentially make available that show you, well, depending upon the types of nuances of how your product goes live, this is and what's the distribution of customers across where they are in the life cycle. Here's how you want to staff the CS function accordingly. So I can be happy to share some of those. And again, feel free if you want to dive in deeper with me. I'm happy to do a call about that. I'm going to go ahead and stop here because that is my last slide. But I thank everybody for the time and attention. I'd love to open it up for any questions that people might have.
There are lots of questions. So I'll even jump in and just start firing away if that works.
Yeah.
Awesome. Here's an interesting one, which is, how do we think about plugging the leaky bucket at a customer when you have basically users who are leaving the company or moving within the company, right? I think it's talking about like the reduction of seats. Is there anything you can do to kind of, I guess, avoid that or make that better?
Yeah, so it really goes down to the whole point around who is the champion, and they've left. Did we know about it in advance, or did we learn of it pretty quickly? And how we engaged with his or her replacement, and to what degree have we done that? So a big aspect about it is really maintaining the sort of what I call the power map of the relationships within the organization. And a lot of times there's confusion as to, does the seller own that? Does the CS person own that? Do they both own it? How do they work together? And that's a big that's a big question to answer, and that describing the roles and accountability and responsibilities between the AE and the CS team can go a long way in making sure that we kind of proactively plug those gaps.
Yeah, I guess part of the question is like, if a company, for example, has users just like there's just fewer users, I think is the question, right? Like, let's say you're selling to a CS team, the CS team is maybe smaller, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they've riffed headcount. I think it's more around like if your customers, have fewer seats.
Yeah, if you're facing some reduction in the contract value because there's churn and there's business slowdown or business impact of the customer.
Yes.
The key question is, are we solving the problem for the folks that are left in a measurable way that the loss of the product would impact them in a negative way to make things even worse, given what's going on? And that goes back to the metrics, because if the tool for that CS team has resulted in greater retention or reduced support cost, or whatever the metrics are that we agreed with the customer on, and we can prove it, then we're going to be better able to insulate ourselves from that downturn. That's not a guarantee, but it's a strategy that could help.
Yeah,
I don't know if that answered the question, but
yeah, that's great. Tips on the land and expand model. How can we help customers bring our product to more use cases and teams internally?
Yeah, I love that question. I think the once we've established that foundation for success, I've experienced it quite frequently, where the buyer themselves or the stakeholders themselves are bringing us into new opportunities. I also like CS to wander the halls. And I use that figuratively because we do so many things remotely now. But I like it when the CS organization feels empowered to proactively ask stakeholders who are happy, hey, are there other, I know the product we sell could work in engineering as well as in product or what have you. Would you guys be willing to introduce us? And who does that? The salesperson can, and that gets into the whole coverage model, which we can talk about. But the CS person has now earned the trust of the customer, and they're not selling; they're just inquiring and surfacing potential or opportunities. Also, as they know the organization, they start to learn about the organization. They start to hear initiatives pop up. They start to hear of people moving to different departments, and they start to become aware that, wow, there's a whole other world within this company that we can sell to. So I like to use CS as the tip of the spear in the land and expand model. In my experience, bringing the AE on as the commercial assistant to drive identified new business opportunities to closure keeps the CS person pure, so to speak. But from a compensation perspective, I would still pay them on the expansion. But so the CS uses the strength of the relationship to surface new opportunities. They bring in the AE to drive them. Now, again, depending upon the company, there might be an account segmentation whereby maybe the enterprise AEs and CSMs team up and they work much more collaboratively than the ones that may be serving the mid-market. So there's a lot of different variations to that. But to me, the tip of the spear for the expand ideally would be a CS person.
Yep. Awesome. Here's a good one tied to what you just talked about. How long should an AE be attached to a client post-close? And are there specific milestones or metrics that can help dictate that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the AE, I recommend that the AE stay engaged with the customer until at least they reach the go live stage, because there's a lot of relationship transfer that has to happen between the AE and the CS person. The AE built relationships with maybe the VP of marketing or the product head or whoever they were selling to. And now the CS person effectively has to build those relationships again, but in a different context. So the AE can really help build that foundation. Secondly, the AE probably built a good org map in terms of the power map of the company, and the AE's got to educate the CS person on who are the sort of the cast and characters. But the CS's person is going to learn of a lot more names and faces during the engagement of getting the customer live that the AE might benefit from knowing about. So keeping them reasonably close together while still freeing the AE up to go do more sales is very prudent. And then once they're live, it's great because the AE can sort of tie the bow on it, right? Hey, we talked about. Did you make those balloons?
It's what happens, I think, if I do thumbs up or
Okay. Well, thanks for the balloons. But yeah,
Yes.
so what you tie a bow on it by saying, look, we told you during the sales process you're going to see 40% time savings, and looks like from the outcome and the analytics you're exceeding that. We're thrilled. Would you mind talking to XYZ or introducing me to ABC? Kind of going back to the conversation we just had. So I like to keep them joined at the hip a little bit, at least through go live. But that may not always be practical. So I think each situation is gonna be a little bit different.
Awesome. This is an interesting one. What's your guidance on the level of technical skill that a post-sales person on the team should have?
That's a wonderful question. I think if you're selling a product that's really specific for a domain or a function, maybe banking or healthcare, or maybe you're selling to cloud security people or what have you, or platform engineers or DevOps. If your CS person knows the business of your buyer to a either deeply functional level or a deeply technical level, or in some cases both, they're going to be in a really strong position to be seen as strategic advisors, not just a point of contact. So I like to elevate the importance and the relevance of the CS person, not as just somebody who's sort of a way station on a journey, but somebody who's really there as your MC to the customer to take them all the way through. And the more in the shoes of the buyer that they have in terms of experience, I think it translates into better outcomes. So if your product is really technical, I would have that person be technical. But at a base level, I want the CS person to be able to be really data-driven and analytical so they can look at metrics, and maybe they're not coming out of the product in a way that you can show to the customer, to take that stuff and construct really powerful dashboards that reflect to the customer's language what the product's doing for them.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think this is Ala in the chat brought up a good point, which is that if you're selling to regular customers and regulated functions, you might not be able to have a shared chat channel.
Yeah, and that's true. And I think finding ways to maintain really close communication and collaboration consistent with the constraints of a financial services, or insurance company that may be regulated in terms of what they can share externally. It's not impossible, it's tough, but it's certainly doable.
Yeah.
But could not agree more.
Yeah. And then I guess maybe we talked about it a little bit. This might be more relevant for later stage companies where you might be segmenting customer success and account management. Could you maybe just talk briefly about that for anyone who's from a later stage company?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I think segmenting customer success along customer types allows you to concentrate skill sets that are specific to that customer type a little bit more. So, for example, if you sell to fintechs in the mid-market, but larger, maybe regional banks in the enterprise space, the folks that deal with fintechs deal with potentially different scenarios. Maybe the tech stack is very consistent in the fintechs and it's newer and modern, but maybe the tech stack is older and less modern with the regional banks. So maybe there's a set of CS teams that are better equipped to work with those organizations, or that you've just got different coverage model because you sell different products to those. On the account management versus CS, I think it's a matter of the nature of the product and what the renew and expand motion looks like. If it's simply, I just want to sell more users, but I don't have to do more heavy lifting to do the expansion, an account manager could be effectively, I'm going to hunt for renewals and incremental revenue growth, whereas the CS person is more focused in on the actual work to get them to that state where they're ready. I've seen both models where you have an AE that's new logo only. You have a CS person that owns the end-to-end sort of go from contract signing to go live, and the account manager picks up and uses both as resources if new opportunities are surfaced. It's an expensive way to staff the go-to-market team, however, and I would probably narrow it down to sort of sellers and CS people, where the AE can play the role of account manager for net new expansion opportunities, and the CS can be CS and continue to stay involved over the long term. Just my opinion, and feel free to disagree with me, but that's kind of the way I see it.
Okay, awesome. I'm just looking at the time. I want to make sure everyone gets a few minutes before they have to hop to their next meeting. But I just want to say thank you so much, Kiran, for this awesome presentation. Lots of amazing templates. Lots of people have asked in chat how they can get their templates. So I pointed everyone to your LinkedIn and for folks to reach out to you on LinkedIn. And then also, of course, this recording, these slides will be made available on our Workbench blog. And as always, if you are a pre-seed operator or pre-seed founder, I should say, or even a pre-founder thinking about starting an enterprise SaaS company, we here at Workbench would always love to chat and meet. And we have lots of other great playbooks, many of which Kiran has helped us with on our Workbench blog, so you can check that out. I guess any other closing remarks, Kiran, from you?
Yeah, I mean, thanks everybody for your time. I will get a copy of the chat, so if any of you ask questions in the chat that I didn't get a chance to answer, I will reach out to each of you and try to get answers back for you as well. Thank you so much for your time. I know everybody's got a lot of things going on during the day. So it was really wonderful to have you join us.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Karen. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.